So we've had a chance to talk about a variety of chart types so far, and now let's go ahead and look at a heat map. So we have a D3 viz open here, and we're going to go ahead and build a heat map from scratch in D3. So I've done a little bit of the work already, so I've gone and loaded a file. So this is actually a dump of the iSchool's Slack. This is the noise channel. There are no users, it's just the messages. And so, and I've also gone and extracted the timestamps out of them. So using the moment.js library, which is a date handling library, and they're encoded in the Unicode or the Unix timestamps. We can first go ahead and look at the data just to get familiar with it. So if we wanted to go ahead and look at what we have in timestamps, we could look at that. So if we look at what we're able to get out using the moment library, we can run this and look at what we have in the timestamps. So this should be an array of timestamps. And it takes a little while to run moment through these. So if I go ahead and run it, here we go. So we can see we have a long array here, and if we dive in and look at that, right, so it's not letting us go in and look at this. Here we go. I ran twice, so it was just stuck. So here we go. We can go in and look at each of these, and we can see that each of these is a moment object. So here's the timestamp. You can see this one is from Saturday 2014. So we have these objects, and we don't want to log that every time, but we're going to want to create a viz. So the first thing we actually need is an SVG. So let's see if we have one in the page. So first, let's just add an SVG to the page. Right, and then we can go ahead and just give it some width and height using the JavaScript. So we're going to be doing some JavaScript to start. So let's just give it a width variable. Let's give it some height. It's going to be, let's do hours going across and days going down. So we'll have it be a little bit wider than it is tall, and then we'll go ahead and select the SVG. So we're just going to go d3.select of that SVG element. Right, and then we'll give it some attributes. So we'll give it the width, and we'll give it the height, h, and that's all we need for there. To be a little pragmatic about our spacing, let's go ahead and give this a margin as well. So we just give it a margin. We'll say we have margin left 10, right 0, bottom, let's give ourselves 20. And top, let's give ourselves 0. So give a little margin, and then we can go ahead and, just for convenience, define a figure width and height. So it's the full size of the figure minus our margins. So that's going to be for us w minus margin dot left minus margin dot right. So this is just the inner size of the figure, and it's going to allow us to set up our scales a little bit more easily. So if we set the fig height, it's going to be the height minus the margin dot top minus the margin dot bottom. Right, so we're rock and rolling, and we're gonna need a scale. So we have our SVG. We're gonna need an X and a Y scale to lay out the elements of our heat map here. So the X scale is going to be hours going across. So let's use a linear scale. So use D3's scale linear, and we'll go ahead and give it a domain. So the domain here, it's going to map from 0 to 24. I'm not doing 0 to 23. I actually want it to have the full 0 to 24, where each element will have width 1 within that. So it's actually 24 spaces. And then the range, you're going to have this map from the left margin to the margin to the figure width, right? So margin at left plus our inner figure width. So that's why it's a little more convenient to define that. And then Y, we're also going to have a linear scale. We're going to have it map from the bottom to the top. So here the domain, right, we're going to be doing days. So we're going to just have that go ahead and map from 0 to 7 and give it the range. Here we actually want that to be inverted. So we'll go from margin dot top to the plus the figure height to the margin dot top. Right, so that's going to give us some X and Y scales to work with. And now we can go back to working and going ahead and appending heat map element for each data point. So we want to do it we want to aggregate on weekday and on hours. So the first thing, we're going to want to define our rectangle elements. We just defined our scales. So let's go ahead and set the width. So we're going to want these square elements. So if I set the width, I can do that using my scale. So if I grab the width of a single tick on the axis, right, and then I want to give it a little space there. So I'll give it 0.9 of that. Right, so that's gonna define our scale. And that's going to define the width here, and we can also define our height, right? I want them to be square, so I'll just give that to be the rectangle width. We could also do the same thing and define it using the Y scale if we wanted. And now we're going to want to go ahead and combine all of our timestamps onto a matrix that'll allow us to view it by weekday and by hour. So we'll define a matrix to do that. So I'll call this the message matrix, and we'll make this down across, right? So pragmatic matrix choice. So it's going to be 7 down. It's going to have 7 rows. And we're going to go ahead and within each of those rows, we'll create another array of length 24 for the hours. So we'll loop through. So for I equals 0, I less than the length of our message matrix, right? And then increment I. We're going to go ahead and set the inner of that message matrix to be an array of width 24, right? So I is going to be a new array of width 24. These are empty arrays, and JavaScript doesn't have any utilities just to define an empty matrix that's 7 by 24. So we can actually loop through the whole matrix here. So we'll go through J less than, here we can just be less than 24, right? And J++, right? And we can initialize our matrix to 0. So matrix ij is going to be 0. Right, so now we have an empty matrix to work with, and we're going to want to go ahead and fill that using our timestamps. We've used the moment library because it makes this pretty easy to extract the hour and the day of week. So we'll just loop through our message timestamps here. So for var I equals 0, here we're going to map I less than timestamps.length. So we'll loop through all of our messages, and we'll increment I. And so within this, we're going to go ahead and fill in our message matrix. So we'll go ahead and fill it in using the timestamps of I. So we'll go ahead and extract that element, timestamps of I. And we want the day. So the day of week going down, right? And then we want the hour going across. So that will be timestamps of I dot hour going across, right? And we'll increment the matrix using that. So we'll just have it add to itself, right? So now we've gone ahead and defined our message matrix. And we could go ahead and we're going to want to actually go ahead and create the rectangle elements. We could go ahead and create seven separate appends for each row, but I think we can do this all at once. So let's define a flat array. So we're going to want all of the objects to append using a data append in D3. So here we're going to actually want something that's the length of all the rectangles. So we'll actually flatten this matrix that we just created. So I'll call this flat mat. So this is going to be a flat matrix. And it's going to be the full width, so 24 times 7. So it's going to be that full range. And then within that, we'll go ahead and fill it in. So we're going to loop over our flat matrix and fill it in using the values in our message matrix. So I less than flat mat.length. And we're going to go ahead and fill in each of those. So we'll go flat mat of I is going to be equal to the message matrix. This is the trickiest part of the math here, is we're going to actually want the ones going across to flatten into that width. So here we'll go ahead and do math.floor of I over 24. Right, so we're going to divide it by 24 to get the day of week that we were in. right? And we want the modulus by 24 to get the hour. So go back to the hour. So that's the trickiest bit there. But we'll go ahead and create the flat matrix. And just to check on our status, right? We can go ahead and take a look at what this flat matrix looks like and make sure we've haven't made any typos so far. And it is unhappy about this. Our message mat.length. So let's just go ahead and do I less than 7 here. Save it. Give it a run. Oh, yeah, of course. Totally overlooked that. Right? And right, here we go. So let's have a look at the message matrix. It has to compute a little bit, but it looks like it worked. So here's our matrix, our flattened matrix of message times. So not quite a viz yet, but we're close. So now we can go ahead and append the rectangles to our visualization. Let's go ahead and just take the SVG, right? And let's select all the rect elements. Of course, it doesn't need to be the rect element. We're just going to get an empty selection back. That's the thing to keep in mind. And we'll append the flat matrix here and create new elements for each of those. So we're going to create a new rectangle, and each of those are going to append a rect. Right, so we've now added all of those new 168 rectangle elements, 168 hours in a week. And within those, we're going to want to set all the attributes, right? So we'll go ahead and set x, right? And x here is going to be the hour position, right? So function di, we can use what looks similar to before, where we're looking up the hour from the flattened index. So it's going to be x of I mod 24. So it's going to be the hour of that longer index. We can go ahead and set the y, and the y is going to be the floor of the division as well. So y is going to be function of di, right? And here we're going to have y of math.floor. It's going to look like our indexing above, I over 24, right? So we've got x and y. We still need to give it a width and height. Right, so let's go ahead and do that. We already defined what our width and height are going to be. Got ahead of ourselves there. So we can say that the width is going to be the rect width. Our height is going to be the rect height. And our we can go ahead and set the fill. So we're going to add all these. We can set the fill to be, here let's just set it to be the same thing. So here let's just set them all to be, let's set them all to be red, right? The number of messages coming in. And we actually want to use our data. So let's set the use our data to set the opacity on these. This is the easiest thing to do here. And so we'll set the opacity, right? And we'll use just our data element. And here we'll return D, right? We probably want to scale it between 0 and 1. So let's return a D over the max number of messages. Right, and we can go ahead and not compute that every time. So var max messages here is going to be d3.max of our flat matrix. So this will scale this between 0 and 1, and we should have added those rectangles. Oop, typo here. Return that. There we go. Math.floor y. Close, close. Okay. Let's give it another shot. It'll take a little bit of computation to go ahead and flatten all these matrices, but here we go. So we can actually dive in and look. Looks like the messages come in the middle of the week. So this is a Sunday through Saturday calendar. And, of course, as you would expect, the heaviest message frequency during the middle of the day, except for Thursday night. Something happened on a Thursday night. So that's building heat map. Of course, there's a lot more ways to go. And next, you'll get a chance to use some different coloring to encode on this heat map.